The Fed15 podcast is presented by Serving Those Who Serve, a financial planning practice serving federal government employees and retirees all over the country. This podcast is for informational purposes only and is not intended to be taken as financial advice. All listeners should consult their personal advisors before taking any action. The opinions expressed by our hosts are their own and do not reflect the views, policies, or position of either Raymond James or Serving Those Who Serve. Securities are offered through Raymond James Financial Services, Inc., member FINRA SIPC. Investment advisory services are offered through Raymond James Financial Services Advisors, Inc. Serving Those Who Serve is not a registered broker-dealer and is independent of Raymond James Financial Services, Inc.
Welcome, everyone, to the Fed15 podcast, presented by Serving Those Who Serve. Each week, as you know, we discuss the latest news and info the feds need to know in 15 minutes-ish or less. This one's going to be longer because it's really special. So hang in with us. So whether you are a seasoned federal employee or just starting out in your career, we've got you covered. So grab your coffee, your energy drink, your green juice, whatever gets you going, kick back, and we're going to tell you some stuff that you probably didn't know. I usually say what you need to know but might have missed. You may not know this, and it's going to be important. As usual, I'm your host, Dan Sipe, and I am joined by the incandescent, incomparable Katelyn Murray.
Thank you, Dan, for the intro. Every time you say incandescent, I think of Marie Curie and her glowing discovery of radiation. Yeah.
Yep.
For sure. Yes, we have a very exciting episode to bring you this week. You probably noticed when you clicked in that the timestamp is a little bit different. You know that we push the 15 minutes. We lean into the 15 minutes-ish. But this week, we're blowing the ish out of the water because we've got a long episode with a very special guest, folks. This week, we are delighted to have Alan Lescht, who is the founder and managing shareholder of Alan Lescht Associates, PC, based out of the Washington, D.C. region, joining us. He is a D.C. employment attorney that has been in the field for over 4 decades, similar to Serving Those Who Serve in the financial planning side of Fed's lives. And he is going to be talking with us about some of the chaos, shall we say, going on in the federal government right now, and really kind of highlighting, a perspective that I think is maybe getting lost in some of the general, tough feelings in the federal government. So welcome, sure. Alan. We are so excited to have you.
Well, thank you for having me.
Yeah, absolutely. So we've got some questions that we're going to kind of work through and kind of talk with Alan. Alan, obviously, very much like us on the financial planning side, is talking to feds every day about the current situation with the downsizing and other issues that are happening. So, Alan, to kind of get us started, what is your perspective on the current state of the federal government downsizing and restructuring under the current administration?
Yeah, I would say right now it is a mess. I think it's a mess in a lot of ways. The number of people being fired in the DMV, DC, Maryland, Virginia, is just unprecedented. I mean, when I tell you, like, I've got 17 lawyers in my office, we're on the phone night and day with people wanting advice. This is current clients, new clients, people calling for consultations. And on top of that, since we were all from the DC, Maryland, Virginia, we're all getting calls and requests for information from friends, from relatives, from friends of friends. I can tell you, I've been consulting with kids of friends of mine that are in the government and scared to death that they're going to be on these lists. So right now, it's really a very sad state of affairs because once we start talking about this, it's hard to find a silver lining, right? Like the specials on TV, we've been on some of these, and if you watch them, you just feel worse and worse because there's a half hour about how many people are being fired, how many unemployment claims there are, how it's impacting the local economy. And now on top of, is like the cherry on top, is that Trump and Musk are attacking the federal contractors. So it's gone from just being federal employees losing their jobs to federal contractors closing down shop. And, the DC area, is if it's not a government town, it's a government contracting town.
Sure.
And even these tech companies that have popped up the last 10, 20 years, I mean, a lot of their revenue comes from the government. It comes from government contracting. So So things are awful. I mean, it's really is hard to find a silver lining here. That you take what you can find, right? So the last couple of weeks, there have been some good decisions, almost like Band-Aids on a huge wound. But like there's a decision from a judge in Baltimore that I've known for a long time, Judge Berdar, that put a TRO on the probationary firings, but it was temporary. And a decision out of California from this judge also was the same thing. This is on the probationary people who have been fired. But it basically says, these decisions say, not so fast. They're pumping the brakes on the firing, but basically saying to the government that, you fired these people the wrong way, put them back on the rolls. But, throughout the decision is basically saying, look, there are rules on the books for how to deal with these things, and go back and do it the right way. And if they do it the right way, then you can fire probationary employees. For probationary employees, for years, it's always been known that they're at will, except for they can't be fired for discriminatory reasons. And most probationary periods last, 2 years these days. It used to be 1 year, but for the entry-level hires, it's usually 2 years. And what would happen is that it would basically be a tryout. We would occasionally get consultations from people who lost their jobs during probation, and they felt it was because of their race, color, religion, disability, what have you. But they would get a letter saying, here's why not making, why you're not passing probation. And the agencies, used to wait till the day or two before, which is also mean-spirited in my opinion, but they would do that. But there would be a reason. It would be on an individualized basis. And so what these two decisions, these two federal judges issued was essentially that. They said, look, this is supposed to be on an individualized basis. Because a lot of the probationary people who lost their jobs the last couple of weeks received excellent reviews. I can't tell you how many people I've talked to said last week I got a 5 out of 5 on my evaluation. And a week later, I get a letter saying my job performance is subpar and I'm being fired for cause, and it's just wrong on so many levels because, I've been doing this for so long. And it's like when companies fire people, in the private sector, they don't like to say it's a budget cut, right? Because no big corporation wants anyone to say, oh, you're not making any money. So what they'll do is they'll do a very rigorous performance review. And you see this in the news once in a while. And they'll let people go for cause. But the truth of the matter is that they're letting people go because they don't have the work, or they don't have the revenue, or they don't have the money. So it's really a bad practice, particularly for entry-level people, these probationary people. The vast majority were recent college grads. Why have them in their record say that they were fired for cause when they weren't, right? And then the next job that they apply for, if it's in the government space, if they have SF50s, it's going to say fired for performance, because anyone that knows federal employment, if you're interviewing somebody that worked in the government, you can ask for their performance reviews for the last 3 years. You can ask for the SF50. You can ask for these things, which tell you a lot. And like, if it's out of context, say 5 years from now, someone's applying for a job and it says that they were fired for cause. I mean, it's when they give that prospective employer, they're going to be hesitant to hire the people. So what's happened with the recent college grads, the probationary people, is really awful. And it's also, in my opinion, having a chilling effect on the government's ability to entice people, to attract talent in the future. Like, I have 3 kids in their, between the early 20s to early 30s. I don't know who in their right mind at this point would want to go to work for the government, particularly now, and it doesn't seem like the chaos, everyone uses that word, it's chaotic. It's worse than chaos, it's just like toxic, every day the news that you're getting is who's being fired. Like the FDA over at White Oak. I don't know if you've ever been over there. They've
Sure.
Huge
Oh, yeah.
facility. I spent a week there doing a hearing a couple of years ago. Now, I remember driving over there and seeing huge parking lots everywhere, but I couldn't find a spot anywhere, right? So I finally found a spot, had to walk like a mile and a half to the building, right? And like, I get these calls the last couple of days, they called everyone back. It's like everyone back all at once, all at the same time in the same place. It's like that movie, a couple of years ago. And then all of a sudden there's nowhere for people to park. And there's no, and it's just craziness. So you've got people going through this insane situation. And of course they turn on the news and what do they hear? They hear that DOGE is going from agency to agency, firing people right and left, closing, they put up all these federal office buildings for sale. And it's just like, there's really, I just think it's going to be very, very hard for people to be productive. And God forbid there's a crisis and you need people who actually know, how to get things done, who to call to get things done. Because the reality is that when they came out with that fork in the road memo, and people that had options and alternatives and, are really motivated, I think that a lot of the good people have left or are leaving or are on the fence, because there's a whole host of people that feel like they're indignant. They really feel that this is offensive and they feel like they're not going anywhere. There's a lot of people that don't want to be told what to do.
Yeah. I think it's probably worth highlighting on the financial planning side, talking about bright flight, right? This issue of your best and brightest who have, typically the most options are going to start weighing those options and they're going to start making decisions. So specifically talking about the issue of bright flight that you raised, Alan, I think it's worth highlighting on the financial planning side, in addition to kind of the fork in the road offers and things like this, we are also seeing VSIPs, voluntary separation incentive payments, coming out across different agencies. Not all agencies have them available, but essentially what these are is a buyout. It is an incentive payment, a one-time lump sum incentive payment that is being offered to folks who are potentially eligible to take a VERA or who are eligible for just regular retirement to go ahead and, pull the trigger on that decision. And often these are your folks who have 20 years, 25 years, 30 years invested, and they know who to call. They are the folks who are mentoring kind of that next generation of government employee. And I think we are going to see some pretty significant bright flight issues there with that. So I'm curious to hear from you. Can you walk us through some of the rights that federal employees have when they're facing potential downsizing or job elimination that maybe they don't realize they have?
Sure. This is actually one of the most fundamental things that I have found in the last couple of weeks in talking to a lot of people, is that this notion of due process, right? I mean, the Trump administration has done a very good job of getting their propaganda out there, making it sound like due process is a dirty word, right? The fundamental due process of federal employees after they pass probation is that they can't be disciplined, and that would be suspended, demoted, or removed, without being told first what they did wrong, right? So this is the fundamental right that feds have. And so this permeates a lot of things, right? This notice of the requirement that they be told what they did wrong before something can happen and have their side of the story. So for federal employees who have passed probation, they have rights to appeal to the Merit System Protection Board, right? The Merit System Protection Board is a quasi-judicial, I would just refer to it loosely as a court, because that's most people will understand. It's composed of administrative judges around the country, and they have been around for a long time. And so they will adjudicate cases of removals, removals or firings in the federal service, demotions, suspensions, etc. So all of these cases where people have been removed, they'll get these letters from the agency. If they pass their probation, at the bottom of the letters, the government's required to lay out your due process rights. And by due process, what can you do about it at this point? So those letters will say you have the right to appeal to the Merit System Protection Board. And the Merit System Protection Board judge will take a look at it and see if people should be fired. For example, anyone proposed to be removed for performance, right? As I understand it, there's a list that's been circulated by the agencies, I think just last week, of quote unquote poor performers. These are people that are going to receive proposed removals based upon performance. What I'll say is that we propose to remove you for X, Y, and Z reasons. You have 7 days to respond, and then a decision will be made. So the decision will be made. If it's anything like what we've been seeing, it's likely going to be a rubber stamp of whatever, the Doge algorithm says it should be, right? So then you'll be able to appeal to the Merit System Protection Board, argue that there was no reason for you to be fired, and the administrative judge sits in the shoes of the decision maker, and they can reverse the decision, they can reinstate you with back pay, and they can reimburse you any attorney's fees that you've paid. So that is the one right, and this right to go to the Merit System Protection Board exists across the board for every federal employee who has passed probation. So for proposed removals, if you're removed for performance, conduct, or what have you, and you disagree with it, you can file there. For the RIFs, right? Everyone's reading about these reduction in force notices, and we're getting clients calling us with these now. They're starting to go out. RIFs are heavily regulated by the OPM. Now, I'm going to use a lot of acronyms here. It's just sort of like, goes with the territory. But if I say something that you're not sure, tell me. OPM, is Office of Personnel Management. And these roles of the OPM have been on the books for a very long time, right? And so they state clearly, when a RIF is permitted, right? How it should be conducted, what rights there are of the federal employees involved. And they're very extensive. This is not like something that is just like a couple of sentences. Like federal employees that are facing a RIF have the right to be, reviewed on an individualized basis. You're supposed to figure out, what has this person's performance been like? How long have they been there? Do they have veteran status, right? All those things are almost like points that people get, so that when the agency is looking to see who they're going to retain and who they're going to let go, the long tenured people who have been performing well, who have veteran status, these people are supposed to have priority placement, so to speak. They're supposed to retain their jobs over other people. And then if you decide to remove one of those people on a RIF, these people actually have what they call bump and retreating rights. The best way to think about it is that if they want to retain someone who's younger without veteran status, the people with the longer tenure and the veteran status can actually say, no, I'll take that job. I don't want to be fired, right? So there's a lot of analysis that has to go into these things. And then if someone is found to be RIFed, like if they decide that you're going to be fired as part of this RIF, that person then will receive severance pay. There's another critical feature of the OPM regulations is that when people lose their jobs involuntarily like this, they're entitled to severance pay. It's capped at 1 year's pay, and there's a calculator that you can actually find on the OPM. And given the speed with which these RIFs are being put out there, I really find it hard to believe that the administration is going to comply with all of these rules that require individualized review, right? Because look what they did with the probationary people. They do it through overnight. My guess, and this is pure speculation on my part, but I read the same things everyone else does. So those people are going in with their computers and getting access to things. So what access is on a computer, if you think about it, for personnel? Probably grade series, right? Like every federal employee has a series number attached to their job, right? They're not getting their official personnel files, reviewing the last 3 years of evaluations, and then deciding should we keep, should we fire, whatever it is. They're looking at this. They're probably saying, okay, there's 57 program managers at this agency. I've decided they can make do with 5. So they fire 52, right? And then, and so on. And then they spit out these form letters that told people who got great reviews last week that they're terrible and they're being fired for performance. So these are the things that were reversed by Judge Berdar and also in the decisions I talked about before because of the way that they did it, right? So think about the RIFs, right? These RIFs aren't just on that you have to look at people on an individualized basis. You actually have to formulate an explanation as to why you need this RIF. Where is the cost cutting? Where is the reorganization? Is this really a RIF, or is it just real, in reality, an effort to eliminate people that OPM, OPM is run by Russell Vogt, who wrote the Project 2025, that frankly lays out everything that they're doing here. If you go back and read it, everything that the government is doing. But so the question is that, are they eliminating these folks because they perceive them to be the deep state opposition or Democrats or their political opposition, right? Because a lot of the quotes that come out of the administration, right, are really pejorative about the federal employees. And you think about one last point I'll just raise is that the probationary employees all were hired within the last 2 years, more or less, right? And even the ones that have been promoted, like if you're in competitive service and you get promoted, there's usually a probationary period for your supervisory status to show that you can be a supervisor. These are all people that were either hired or promoted during the Democrat administration. So when they say that they're going after their political opponents or it's insinuated, that's really who they're firing. They're firing people that Biden hired or promoted. And so I still firmly believe that a lot of this is politically motivated, because when you go back to the Merit System Protection Board, and I talked about where these cases will be adjudicated, one of the things that you can argue, it's called affirmative defenses. What happens is that federal employees with due process rights have the right to challenge the reason for their firing, right? But if they think that there are ulterior reasons, like if it was discriminatory because of race, sex, gender, disability, they can check that box and that gets adjudicated too. And that's called a mixed case. But in these cases also, and we see this in the filings, like we're filing it, it's not unique to us. A lot of law firms are doing this, is that they're arguing that this is political partisanship discrimination, right? Now, and it's sort of like easy to miss the forest from the trees, with this stuff, because like so much is going on at once and people sort of like forget that this it's illegal, right? In our country, the spoils system was declared illegal a long time ago, right? I mean, the notion that the president every 4 years would fire the civil service, this was in the 1800s and early 1900s. Like
we're talking Andrew Jackson days there. Dan and I are both students of history. Yeah.
Yeah. It's like the boss tween, right?
Sure.
And that's what this is turning into, though. And so it's illegal. And so you can allege that at the Merit System Protection Board, and it's a violation of the law, and it can be adjudicated too. So going back to the RIFs, though, I think that this is going to be a big deal. A lot of people are going to get RIF notices, but it's very important, if nothing else, the takeaway from this today is that federal employees are not helpless, right? There are things you can do. You can hire a lawyer like me, and there are lawyers like me that have done this work for a long time. We appear at the MSPB and these EEO offices across the country. It's administrative practice. But the thing is, don't think that you're going to get fired and there is nothing you can do. And really, you can just look to these probationary employees who have just been reinstated, right? This is as a result of these two decisions.
Right.
They're not out of the woods, right? But
right.
But at least you see that, that when judges review these things, a lot of them are finding in favor of the employees. You have these two decisions we're talked about. There's a judge in the District Court of Maryland that just ruled that the dismantling of the USAID was illegal. All these decisions obviously will be appealed, right? That's the way our system works. And some will wind up at the Supreme Court, some may not. And it remains to be seen. But what's happened is because they fired people so fast, the actions, the firings are far outpacing the speed with which judges are making decisions.
Right.
I mean, but that's true all the time. That's the way our system works.
Sure.
People get fired, you sue, you get a decision down the road. But going back to the rights of federal employees, though, you have the right to challenge these things. And you can recover reinstatement, back pay, attorney's fees. And sometimes people have said to me, I'm so disgusted with everything. Why do I want reinstatement? I don't want to go back to work there. We heard this from a lot of people. And the reality, though, is that if you win reinstatement, you'll get your back pay. You get reimbursed whatever attorney's fees you've paid. And then you can resign, and at least your
You leave on your own terms.
Right.
Voluntary, resignation.
For sure.
And
two, from a retirement perspective, I mean, we've talked with a ton of people who are right on the cusp of maybe a major milestone. They're right on the cusp. And the biggest one that comes to mind is age 62. At age 62, sure, as a Fed, if you have 20 years of work experience, you get a 1.1 times pension multiplier. And that is effectively a 10% raise in retirement on your first pension. So if you're in a situation, and I talked to, unfortunately, a ton of Feds who are in this very sticky situation where they're on admin leave and they're turning 62 in, fall. And so they're in this really difficult spot where, if they're terminated between now and 6 months from now, they could be looking at no pension at all, no FEHB, no FEGLI. Healthcare is the number one expense in retirement. So, I mean, we argue that FEHB may arguably be the best federal benefit that's out there. So I think that there are definitely people who have a lot on the line who need to know that there are definitely ways that they can challenge this. I'm curious, you mentioned the Merit Systems Protection Board, and they, of course, famously had a big backlog, which they have now fought almost all the way through. And I'm assuming that now all of this, chaos that's going on is going to potentially result in more of a backlog for them. I'm curious, if there's any sort of read that you have on timeframes for things. And it may be too soon to know, but what sort of time frame are we looking at for Feds who are potentially being placed on leave or being separated from their jobs today?
Yeah, you have to wait until the Feds have to wait until they're removed to file at the MSPB.
Right.
So being put on admin leave, if you file,
still on
premature, it'll be dismissed.
Right.
But I think what's happened so far is that the MSPB has received these sort of class action type filings, right? So it's just this giant filing arguing all these probationary employees should have been treated as if they had due process because it was really a mass RIF. It wasn't a probationary firing, right?
Mm-hmm.
And you have that. But what's going to wind up happening is that I think this is my own view, right? This is my personal view, is a lot of these will go on a case by case basis, right? Because everyone's performance is different. Their tenure is different. What they do is different. The type of benefit to the taxpayers, they refer to this as the efficiency of the service. Do you help the way things go is different. And I think that's what's going to happen. And so let's just assume, they have thousands of individual firings in the next 4 to 6 weeks, right? Mm-hmm. And let's say 60% file to MSPB, right? That's a lot of cases.
Right.
And the MSPB, when it was put in place, remember, it's for to adjudicate people losing their jobs, being suspended, being demoted. These are very serious things. So these cases actually are supposed to go very quickly. And I think it's going to be very interesting to see how they adjudicate these things. As far as I know, MSPB has not suffered any losses, any employee losses, in terms of people being fired. I don't know if you've probably seen or heard about this. They've actually fired immigration judges, right? And the letters say that there's a lack of work, yet there's a 5,000 case backlog, right? It's just, you can't make this stuff up, right? Because they want their people making these decisions. And so the MSPB will be interesting to see how they deal with this, because They have not seen RIFs. I'm talking about MSPB is composed of administrative judges, right? And judges are federal employees, right? And so you think about it, a lot of them have not seen RIFs before, right? Because it's been a while since there's I think the last one was maybe under Obama trying to do a RIF of one of these agencies, or Clinton.
Bush.
I don't remember. Was it Bush? Yeah, it's
Bush
a long
too.
time ago. And so they're going to have to go back and read the regs, right? But equally important, and it's something that we haven't talked about, is that when Trump won, if you can think back, seems like 10 years ago, but it's really not, is like most people were worried about what they called Schedule F, right?
Yes.
Schedule F was where the last go around, Trump said, I'm going to take all of these experienced people, these 14s and 15s. These are people who have been there 15, 20 years, or at the top of the government service. I'm going to make them all political appointees for all purposes, basically. I'm going to take away their due process rights. Because he's saying these people make policy. And by doing that, he wants to be able to fire them at will, like political appointees. And so when he first won, the people that I have personal friends that are 15s and clients, that was all the consultations that we were getting.
Sure.
Oh my God, I'm going to be made Schedule F. Then they changed Schedule F. They call it now policy/career, but it's the same thing. And the people, what we were hearing was like, oh my God, I'm really just upset. That doesn't mean they're going to be fired, right? But they were just really indignant over the whole thing. Well, the way the regs worked under Biden, because Trump put in Schedule F, Biden eliminated it, and Biden went through the rulemaking on this thing. And it says that if your classification, that's what they call it, it's competitive service or it's this political appointment, if your classification changes, it's converted to something different, you can go to the Merit System Protection Board and litigate it. And so OPM, about a month or so ago, put out this guidance, this memo, very long. They basically tried to define what they consider to be Schedule F. And it's everybody. I mean, it doesn't say senior people who are making decisions about policy. I think that there are like 27 subpoints. It's like A to Z is what they did. It's like, it includes everybody. So what does that mean? It means if you get a notice of Schedule F, call a lawyer like me because you'll be able to litigate it. Like this notice from OPM actually had the audacity to say, the Biden rule giving you the right to go to the MSPB on this decision doesn't apply. That's not the way our country works.
Yikes.
Like if Trump wants to change rules, there's rulemaking. There are absolutely laws that say this is how you do it. You send it out for comment, whatever. And so I think at the end of the day, what's going to happen with Schedule F is people will file at MSPB. The OPM or these agencies will say, oh, you have no jurisdiction. I have a feeling that somewhere down the road, it'll go to the board or to the federal circuit. That's the Circuit Court of Appeals that deals with these cases. Someone's going to say the rules on the book say that MSPB judges make these decisions. So then you're going to have this is going back to your question about is the MSPB properly, qualified, equipped, right, to handle all these cases? Do they have enough people? I don't know, because they're going to be dealing with all these removals, and then they're going to have an onslaught of cases having to do with Schedule F. And I also believe that a lot of people are going to be filed these things called whistleblower appeals, right? Whistleblower appeals, like if you're fired because you refuse to break the law and you're a federal employee, you can file a case of whistleblower case. Like, for example, like there was a whole slew of people that were asked by DOJ, turn over all the classified information because we want to look at it. And these people declined because they said, well, you don't have a top secret clearance. How can you be looking at top secret information? I don't know what happened with all that, but there's going to be a lot of instances of that where people feel that they're refusing to do something because it's unlawful. Now, to have a whistleblower case, you have to refuse to break the law, and you have to have a good faith belief that what you're saying and doing is right. You don't have to be correct. You just have to have a good faith belief that, you're doing something right. And then if you get fired, you file first with this place called the Office of Special Counsel, and then you have to wait 120 days, and they give you an exit letter, and the exit letter says you have the right to file in the Merit System Protection Board, right? And so I have a feeling there's going to be a ton of those cases. There's going to be the Schedule F cases. There's going to be the removal cases. And it gets better, though, because the next step that I've been reading is the agency says, all right, there's too many of these federal office buildings in D.C., too many agencies in D.C. Let's move them to Duluth. Let's move them to Peoria. Let's move them out of here in the hope that 10% of the feds just don't move and they quit, right, of their own volition. Well, I think what they're going to end up doing is issuing a lot of things called management-directed reassignments, right? I don't know if your listeners are familiar with this, but basically it's a notice that you would get that says, we've decided that your job is much better done 2,000 miles away somewhere else, and we have a job waiting there for you. You know, we look forward to you, you know, bright-eyed and bushy-tailed in 2 weeks, right?
Yeah, I've been looking for Dan to file one of those for my job, which I think might be better done in Hawaii.
Yes.
So I'll look for that, Dan.
Yeah, the likelihood
I'll get right on that.
Moving to Hawaii is
bringing
like
some
slim and
levity.
none. You know, they're going to be moving to. I'm just speculating. Red states, you know, that are, you know, whatever. But and so, you know, these, of course, there's a whole analysis. They're hard to challenge, but if they do challenge them for the same reasons, like we've talked about, political partisanship, the whole thing, is that they wind up Merit System Protection Board, right? So they're going to have a lot of cases, and I don't know how they're all going to deal with it. The one thing that's interesting to me, this whole mess that we're talking about here, this whole thing with Trump and the federal employees and how they're just moving without regard to a lot of the rules and regulations, is judges looking at these things. First off, MSPB. These are federal employees, right? These are human beings that go to work, read the same news as everyone else, and they get paid. They get paid the same. They have the same leave. They have the same rules. So they have the same day-to-day life as other federal employees. They're working towards retirement too. You know what I mean? They get evaluated too. The administrative judges, these are federal employees, and like they read the same things. And now you take a look at the federal judiciary, right? These judges that are issuing these decisions, some of whom, like this Judge Boasberg, is under attack for this issue having to do with the plane that he ordered to be turned around. I mean, these judges, most federal judges, a lot of people don't realize this, is that to become a federal judge, you have to be appointed, right? And the bench that they look to, for the most part, is the Department of Justice, right? If you look at the federal judges across the country in U.S. district courts, this is the way the courts are set up. You have district courts, which is the first court, right? The low level. Then you have the Circuit Court of Appeals, right? And then you have the Supreme Court. So there's those three things. Most cases are decided by district court judges, and there's district court judges all over, right? The courthouses are everywhere. I would venture a bet that more than 50%, maybe even closer to 70%, came from the Department of Justice. That is the natural progression for judges. And these judges, again, are human beings. They're federal employees. They work for the judiciary. They don't work for the executive. But they most of them got their start at the Department of Justice. And the DOJ lawyers, keep in mind too, are the government lawyers in federal court. So if you sue the government for anything, most things in federal court, a Department of Justice lawyer will show up to defend. So these judges these U.S. District Court judges, they deal with the Department of Justice. They started out there, and they're seeing what is going on with the Department of Justice. I mean, I'm not speaking of any confidential information. You can just read about this stuff. You know, they are firing people who were assigned to work on the January 6th cases. Now, I'm not going to get political, right? These cases, you know, whether you agree with them or you disagree with them, you're talking about like over 1,000 people at the Department of Justice who were assigned by their supervisors to work on these cases, right? Do you think that these people had a choice in the matter? Of course not. Like there are young lawyers that we've talked to in their late 20s, got out of law school, go to the Department of Justice. It's a very, a lot of their offices are very prestigious. In other words, these are jobs that they're not just handing out like candy. You have to really work to get these jobs. So these are high achieving young lawyers, and they're getting fired because their supervisor told them like a year and a half or 2 years ago, here's a new case you're working on. What do you think would have happened if they said no? They would have been fired, right? For insubordination.
Right.
And so now these people are being fired for cause. And in the DC office, the U.S. attorney in D.C., and this has been reported in the newspaper, is that he's looking into anyone that criticizes Musk, and it's like, this is just like beyond the pale. And so I have a feeling that when these cases reach judges, in particular, ones that have been around a few years, they're going to pay very close attention. They're going to sit up straight, pay attention, and hold the government accountable. Because just look to see what Alsop and Berdar. Now, I don't know Alsop and Berdar's backgrounds, right? I've tried cases with Judge Berdar, so I know him. But, it's like I have a feeling that judges looking at this are like, what on earth is going on here? We're a nation of laws. We're a nation of rules. These rules are on the books for reasons. If like a lot of times people ask me, everyone I know, like we get on this subject and they're asking me a million questions. And I'm always telling them that it's like this notion that federal employees can't be fired, right? I'm off topic here, but I think this is an important one, is a myth. It's a complete myth. Federal employees can be fired. Just look at the Merit System Protection Board did not come into existence last year. It's been around a long time. They have statistics. They have backlogs because they have so many cases filed.
Right.
And by and large, the only cases filed there are for people who are fired, demoted, suspended. Bad things happening to them on the job. So all it takes for an agency to fire a federal employee who is not performing or misbehaving or not following instructions, or the big thing with Trump was like, I want people that are going to follow my instructions, right? The news was the last go around, he felt that the feds and the civil service didn't do what he wanted them to do. Well, let's say he came in this time, and instead of what happened, he actually said, okay, anyone that doesn't follow instructions, I want out, right? And so all I had to do was follow that due process I talked about before. A manager would have to sit down in front of a word processor, type out a letter. You're not following instructions. I'm proposing to remove you. You have 7 days to respond. 7 days later, they get a response. If they don't believe what the person is selling, is in other words, like that their explanations are inadequate, they remove them. That's it. And I can't tell you how many federal employees have been fired. Every year, they don't keep track. I took a look out of curiosity to see if I can figure out how many cases were filed, on removals, or how many federal employees were actually fired each year. It's hard to tell, but they have an attrition rate. But the attrition rate is the number of people that are either fired or retired or resigned. So They lump them all together. It's about 5%. But coming to my law office, before we went paperless, we had Redwell folders everywhere, and a lot of them were people who were fired, and other law offices too. And that's what usually makes up the bulk of the cases at the MSPB. So this notion that you can't fire feds is just such nonsense. What it really points up is that managers don't want to be bothered. And this is not limited to Democrat managers, Republican managers. It's like, managers don't want to be bothered with this stuff, right? And then this is in the private sector too. How often do you see managers just check people as 3 satisfactory because they don't want to go through having a write-up of somebody, right? This is human nature, right?
Sure.
Like there's this notion, I think some people may have heard, Jack Welch, that was the former chairman and CEO, I think, of GE.
Fired the bottom 10%.
Exactly.
Yeah.
It's a very tough thing to do, but there are companies that do that. But the reality is that you can fire federal employees. the rules are on the books.
Right.
Follow the rules.
It's just that there's a process. So it's not like it can't happen, but there is definitely a process to be followed. I think it'll be interesting to see how things go with MSPB. And I think to kind of pull it back in and make it a little more relevant for our financial planning folks, what we're saying here is there are steps that you can take. There are appeals that you can file. There is a system in place to allow you to challenge some of these decisions if you feel that they've been made incorrectly or with unsound basis. However, I will say, financial planner brain always on, be prepared for that to take some time. MSPB famously, has had a big backlog due to an inability to reach quorum at a certain point, and they have kind of fought their way through that, only to be, it seems like, right at the cusp of being kind of, in another deluge of cases. Be prepared for it to take some time. So if you are separated from service and you do not have the benefit of an annuity, you need to have an emergency fund. We typically say 6 months worth of non-discretionary expenses. You guys know, who listen to the podcast regularly, that's the stuff that you got to pay, or, you lose it or they take you to jail. So things like your mortgage, your electricity. I get really hangry, so the grocery budget is definitely in my non-discretionary because it is a non-negotiable. But make sure that you have that set aside, ideally in a high yield savings account. And, these are unprecedented times. We're dealing with, really, Alan, I like your word for it, a mess. And so it may be time to maybe up that from 6 months to 12 months. It may be time to look at that, to revisit some of your investment strategy, to make sure that you have resources set aside to get through that period of time, when you may be waiting on a review on a case. So I want to toss it to Dan, because we've been kind of chit-chatting, and I want to make sure that we hear from the OG, because he has been through 4 different RIFs.
This is number 4, yeah.
Yeah, we've got a veteran on staff when it comes to RIFs. So want to hear from Dan a little bit before we wrap up this.
Well, for starters,
episode.
Alan, I want to say thank you. You are as advertised, and you're dcemploymentattorney.com. That's your website, correct?
That's right. And if you put my name into the Google, there's only one Alan Lescht. I always tell my kids that last name, once people get, it's hard, but once people get it, there's only one of us.
And folks, I've been to his site. The blogs are terrific. So be sure to visit the site, read the blogs, and I will tell you right now, I've been at this for a minute, met a lot of people. This is a great guy for you to know with some of the stuff that's coming down the pipe. Alan, kind of a closing thought outside of you and your site, any resources or organizations that you think Fed should know about as they try and navigate these times of uncertainty?
It's really hard to say, because I get to ask this question a lot, like, what can people do? It's very hard to prepare for this stuff. I will just tell you that download your OPIA, have it ready, have your reviews. And one thing, going back to this notion of dollars and cents and what you can do with your money, I think a lot of people don't realize, if you are the victim of a RIF, or if you get involuntarily fired, you should be able to obtain severance pay. Because a lot of people ask me, oh my God, I need the money for the mortgage. How am I going to pay you? And where am I going to get the money for legal fees? But you could get the severance pay, use that for the legal fees. It may be the best money you ever spend, because for people like you, like what you were talking about earlier, Katelyn, is like people are getting close to retirement, or they've been there 15 or 20 years. They don't have a job to go into. It used to be you'd go work for these contractors, make more money, and everything would be great. That kind of thing doesn't exist right now, right? So paying and fighting for your job may be the best alternative. And if you get it back, the returns will be enormous, right? And so I think people should know that, and don't feel, really, there are things you can do. You hire a lawyer like us, we'll fight for you. But if you can't afford it, go file on your own. Don't just take it laying down, because that's what they're hoping for. They're hoping for people just to think that there's nothing I can do. I hear that a lot, and I have to sort of be nice about, to disabuse people of that notion. But there are things you can do. Don't think this is the end. And I think, I'm eternally optimistic. We may wake up next week and find that, some court has ruled that Doge and Musk don't have the authority to do what they're doing. right? And then maybe something else will take over the administration's attention. Then it can go back to normal.
Well, thank you so much for joining us, Alan. Really valuable insights to share. We really appreciate you taking some time to talk with us and with our listeners. Again, dcemploymentattorney.com, folks, if you're interested in checking out Alan's team and the blogs that he's got available there. We at Serving Those Who Serve are big fans of blogs. So free information, go seek it out. That's all the time we have for today, folks, on this super special episode. You know we'll be back next week to bring you all the latest updates that you need to make informed decisions about your career and financial well-being as a Fed.
And absolutely be sure to subscribe to this podcast on YouTube and Spotify. Hit that subscribe button so you never miss an episode, and be sure to share it with your friends and colleagues.
And for more information on the topics covered in today's show and more, be sure to check out our blog at STWServe.com. While you're there, you can subscribe to our weekly newsletter, The Weekly Serving, to get all the latest news for Feds delivered straight to your inbox every week. And if you are interested in diving even deeper into learning about your federal benefits and financial planning for Feds, we encourage you to join us for one of our complimentary webinars. We have some great webinars coming up. We've got a tax planning session on April 9th and a financial planning for Feds session coming up on April 10th. The financial planning for Feds session is one of my favorites. I think it's a great place to start if you're just learning about your benefits as a Fed and how you can use that to plan for the future. Of course, if you prefer a one-on-one approach, you can reach out to our team directly for a financial planning consultation at meetings@stwserve.com. We're always happy to talk with you. So thank you for listening to this very special episode of the Fed15. I am Katelyn Murray. I'm joined by Dan Sipe and our fabulous guest, Alan Lescht. I want to thank you one more time for joining us. Dan and I will see you all next week. Take care.